Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this NHS Lanarkshire Monklands Replacement Project People's Hearing. This event has been set up to enable members of the public and other stakeholders to come along and express their views on developing plans to choose a site for the replacement Monklands Hospital. My name's Paul Parsons. I'll be your independent chair for today to go through the proceedings. We have 4 submissions that have been made. Presenters aren't here this morning, so we will ask members of the audience to volunteer to come forward and read the submissions into the record. Before we get going, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. Thank you to those of you who are watching online. Welcome. You can pose questions either from the floor here when we invite you, or online, and we will take the opportunity to present those, ask those to the panel, or later on in our question and answer session for the project team. So, this morning I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves before we get going. So I'd like to start with Isabel.
Good morning, I'm Isabel Brown. I'm an independent panel member today with a background in economic development, skills and learning, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute and ask the appropriate questions to make sure that the presentations are thoroughly researched.
Excellent.
I'm Andy McCusker from WSP. We're looking at the ground engineering and contamination issues.
My name is Douglas Bissett. I'm again from WSP and I deal with traffic and transportation matters.
I'm Harry Burns. I'm a public health professor and have previous experience of major change to hospital provision in Glasgow.
Welcome. I'm just going to check that we can be heard by everybody. Can everybody be heard? Yeah. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, but I'd like to ask Colin, would you come and read the first submission into the record for us, please? We first hear from Neil Gray, MP, and Alex Neil, MSP. Would you like to join us at the table? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good morning, I'm Colin Lauder. I'm the Director of Planning, Property and Performance for NHS Lanarkshire. I've been asked today to read 2 submissions made by our 2 parliamentary colleagues, neither of whom unfortunately could be here today. My apologies to them if I don't give them full justice. We have 2 emails, the first of which is dated the 20th of February to the Chief Executive of NHS Lanarkshire, and there was a second follow-up email which is dated the 28th of February, again to the Chief Executive from the 2 parliamentarians. I'll read the first email, which is dated the 20th of February. Good morning. I'm writing to offer the areas of concern Alec Neil, MSP, and I hold regarding information that's available about the site for the new Monklands Hospital. At the outset, I should say Alex and I fully support a new build Monklands Hospital and look forward to this massive investment in the area to bring acute health provision to cutting-edge standards. We're excited by the clinical model and the early design ideas which we think look fantastic. Where we are concerned about getting the location of the hospital right. We previously submitted the attached document to the previous site location process. Some of the information in this document is about process, but many of the concerns around location remain. In addition to the previously stated concerns, we would like to add the following, and I'll now go through a list of 10 specific points made in the email. Number 1, we are concerned as to whether NHS Lanarkshire have considered or approached North Lanarkshire Council regarding planning considerations at the Garcross site. A number of other planning applications at and around the site have been refused in recent years, with particular planning concerns about transport congestion. We would also be concerned that the Garcross site could have significant planning problems due to its industrial past and the contamination of the site. This does not appear to have been discussed or acknowledged. Paragraph 2. Have NHS Lanarkshire consulted with Police Scotland about the congestion concerns on the roads in and around the Gartcosh site? We believe the roads in their current format and usage have serious congestion, adding 3,000 houses to the immediate area over the coming years, and a hospital has the potential to cause gridlock on the M73 and surrounding smaller roads that would need to be used for access. Paragraph 3. We remain concerned about the potential contamination at the Gartcosh site, particularly following the issues around the St Ambrose/Buchanan High School site. Public perception and a resulting lack of confidence could spread to a hospital being built on contaminated land. We want a site everyone can get behind. Paragraph 4. We are concerned there has not been an updated report on drilling at the Gartcosh site, which was promised to be made available. Paragraph 5. We remain concerned about the impact moving Monklands Hospital to the fringes of the NHS Lanarkshire/NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde boundary will have on footfall at the new hospital. We believe NHS Lanarkshire have grossly underestimated the change in flow, particularly at the A&E unit, with more people from Glasgow finding it more convenient than central Glasgow hospitals. We believe Gartcosh as a site could and should have been ruled out of site consideration for this reason. Paragraph 6. We are concerned that the areas of highest deprivation, according to the latest SIMD indexes, and those who will use the hospital most, people from Airdrie and Coatbridge, are the ones who will be impacted the most by moving outside the Monklands area and to Gartcosh. The increased travel times to Gartcosh are for those living in Airdrie and Coatbridge. There are no direct rail links, and Gartcosh is very difficult to access by car for those areas. Gartcosh will be harder to access for people in Airdrie and Coatbridge, even if they can afford a car. Moving the hospital to Gartcosh would therefore go against the NHS's plan to reduce health inequalities. It has the potential to significantly exacerbate them. Paragraph 7. We are very concerned that Gartcosh is presented as being an accessible site in public transport terms because of the proximity of the Gartcosh railway station. However, Gartcosh is virtually inaccessible for the vast majority of those currently accessing Monklands Hospital, and the rail link towards Glasgow would suggest this would make the Gartcosh site more accessible to patients in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde than those in the Monklands catchment, further strengthening the case that this would significantly change the footfall, particularly at the A&E, with more patients accessing the hospital from outside NHS Lanarkshire. Paragraph 8. There are also concerns about the Gartcosh line capacity to cope with additional hospital traffic coming in both the Glasgow and Falkirk directions. Network Rail has given no CP6 plan to add any capacity, route or track, either in their short-term or 40-year plans. The Gartcosh rail link could therefore be deemed to be a significant disadvantage to the Gartcosh site, as it has the potential to add additional patients footfall from beyond the catchment, while only benefiting a small number of patients. This is in contrast to the benefit that Drumgelloch station offers, as it allows patients from Caldercrux right through to Blair Hill to easily access the Western Moffat site in particular. This line covers significantly more of the catchment area and a large number of areas which are the focus of greatest deprivation. Paragraph 9. We are concerned about the way people from the areas of highest deprivations will be represented and considered at the scoring exercise. People living in poverty are less likely to interact with consultation exercises such as this, and are less likely to put themselves forward to be local representatives at events like the scoring event. It's therefore crucial that the way people living in poverty, who are most likely to need and use the hospital, are properly considered. There needs to be a specific representation to the scoring team and the board decision-making meeting on the way people living in poverty use the current site and will use the hospital at the new site. The scoring criteria also needs to be amended to ensure people in the postcodes with the highest levels of deprivation, according to the latest SIMD index, are not further disadvantaged by the hospital site. Paragraph 10. We are concerned that a large number of the lowest paid staff at Monklands Hospital will have the same issues with accessing the Monklands Hospital if it were to move to Gartcosh as patients on low incomes. A large number of such staff live in the Airdrie and Coalbridge area, and these are the areas with the greatest negative impact in terms of travel, in particular by moving to Gartcosh. Choosing one of the Airdrie sites would minimise the impact on patients living in poverty and local staff on the lowest incomes. Excuse me. Finally, we're concerned that all of the updated information for each site has not been made available before the People's Hearing, as this defeats the purpose of this aspect of the process. For instance, we do not have the updated boring information for the Gartcosh site, as was previously promised. People already have a very short time to digest and critique all of the information available in order to inform the scoring exercise. And by not having all of this information prior to the deadline for the People's Hearing submissions, we cannot scrutinise this information or influence the scoring exercise about it at all. I hope all of these issues can be considered, responded to and reflected in the scoring exercise to ensure a robust decision is taken. Yours sincerely, Neil Gray MP, Member of Parliament for Airdrie and Shotts.
Thank you very much. I'd need a glass of water after that.
Yes, indeed.
There is a second part. I should just say that that email included with it a submission of some 20 pages, which have been submitted and received in the previous exercise. So that's been in the public domain for some time and is available to us today for our discussions as well. Whenever you're ready.
Indeed, Paul, thank you. Second email, which is from Neil Gray MP to the Chief Executive of NHS Lanarkshire, dated the 28th of February 2020. Good afternoon. I'm writing further to the email below from Alex and I to offer further points for the People's Hearing on Monday. This is further to the information that was published yesterday after the previous submission deadline. We are concerned at lack of time that has been made available to scrutinise all of this information ahead of the People's Hearing and the scoring event. While there is an opportunity to feedback after scoring, it's important that the information provided at the scoring event is accurate, balanced and objective to ensure the preferred site has been reached in a process that can be supported by all. There was a lot of information contained in the document released yesterday and revisions from previous information released. This email should be considered in addition to the one copied below from yesterday. The documents released yesterday add greater concern about the ground conditions at the Gartcosh site in particular, and it appears to us this poses the greatest risk to the project. The unknown objects beneath the ground and the unknowns around issues like asbestos that require further significant investigations provide greatest concern to us. There was also significant downward revision regarding the soil remediation required at the Glen Mavis site. From a cost perspective, the new figure is a tenth of what was previously in draft reports, and there are now question marks as to whether much of the sludge could be dealt with by incorporating it into the soils, although we note the need for SEPA and NLC to be involved in this process and would welcome that intervention. We are concerned that if remediation costs have had to be revised down at the Glen Mavis site to such a degree that the costs associated at the other site, where contamination remediation is required to a similar or greater extent, namely at Gartcosh, could also be wrong and potentially grossly underestimating the costs at that site. We note the ground conditions at Western Moffat as appearing very favourable. We also note the fact that the overall costs associated with building on each of the three sites are now within a very small margin of difference. This means the cost-benefit analysis carried out for and at the scoring exercise will be crucial to the determination of the preferred site. For this reason, we would query why in some of the revised reports the transport journey times have been released without reflecting the new East Airdrie Link Road. This road will be a dual carriageway for much of its route, linking all of Lanarkshire, and will make the Glen Mavis and Western Moffat sites incredibly accessible to those living in and around Cumbernauld, as well as others accessing the hospital for its regional services. Airdrie and Coatbridge account for half of all the catchment outpatient admissions at Monklands, and the Fairer Scotland report highlights those areas as having the most significant levels of deprivation. Indeed, almost 2/3 of all of the people living in the highest SIMD areas of the catchment live in Airdrie and Coatbridge. Moving the hospital to Gartcosh would significantly negatively impact the majority of those who currently use the hospital, and in particular the vast majority from the areas of highest deprivation. By moving to Gartcosh, the hospital would marginally improve access for less than a fifth of those who currently use the hospital from the northern part of the catchment. Indeed, the new East Airdrie Link Road could make the accessibility for those in Cumbernauld Central, identified as having relatively high levels of deprivation, just as easy to Western Moffat or Glen Mavis, if not easier, by road as the Gartcosh site. We would appreciate greater information about the cost, not just in terms of ward capacity, but treatment and A&E flow of locating the hospital at each of the three sites. There is an acknowledgement that Gartcosh will have an impact on catchment and patient flow, but we have not seen an analysis on cost to NHS Lanarkshire, nor impact on A&E services in particular. This means we feel strongly that the scoring exercise must include criteria to reflect catchment and footfall changes from each site, and to reflect the impact on patients from the catchment or from the areas of highest rates of poverty according to the SIMD index. At the end of the day, this is the primary responsibility of the hospital to reduce health inequalities for people in the Monklands catchment. Yours sincerely, Neil Gray MP, Member of Parliament for Airdrie and Shorts.
Thank you very much, Colin. And thank you to Neil Gray and to Alex Neil for their contribution. I'm going to ask the panel for their reflections. Generally, there appear to be some strong themes in the submission. And I wonder, Sir Harry, if you would offer your thoughts on the points raised around serving the patients from areas of multiple deprivation as a kick-off point for us.
Sure. I understand the points that the two politicians raise, and clearly it's an issue, but my whole career is based on the fact that acute hospitals are not the way to narrow health inequalities. I mean, for 15 years I was a surgeon. I worked in the Royal Infirmary in Glasgow, and I stopped being a surgeon because I was concerned about the inequalities that I saw in the East End of Glasgow, and realised that these inequalities are socially and economically determined, and that it's, you know, the finger in the dike stuff, expecting the NHS to fix inequalities. They deal with the consequences of social and economic policy. So, yeah, I get what they're saying, and I understand it, and I support the fact that you need to provide health care in areas of serious deprivation. But just last week, I was in London at a meeting to review progress against a big report that came out 10 years ago on health inequalities in England, and every single speaker said it's the politicians that have to fix this. So, leave that aside. The point around this is that, yes, access to health care is important. Access has changed significantly in terms of availability of different approaches to monitoring patients, to supporting patients, and so on, and it will continue to develop over the next few years. So, realise this, it's a significant issue, perhaps more significant issue than, or as significant as the fact that a lot of people living in the lower end of the socioeconomic scale actually work in Monklands. And if their jobs were to go, then that would be of a significant impact on health inequalities. But again, that's something that we considered in Glasgow 15, 16 years ago, and that does not seem to have happened significantly with changing hospital provision in Glasgow. So I acknowledge this, and I think the Health Board is aware of the issues around health inequalities, and is already, I know from discussing with public health colleagues, working to try and narrow those inequalities in ways that are evidence-based. So
Thank you.
it's a valid concern, but it's really important to understand that a new hospital is not the answer to socioeconomically determined inequalities in health.
So I wonder, is there anything, and maybe this is to come back to you on in a little bit, is there anything in what the submission says around the project having to take health inequalities and access into account in its scoring? We do have a discussion about scoring this afternoon. And if you, if there were anything that you might suggest we could use, or the project team could use as a measure.
Well, the measure of health inequalities that's commonly used is splitting areas into what are known as SIMDs, indexes of Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. So you can get down to small areas, and you can weight areas depending on how common lay people are, say, in the lowest decile, the lowest 10% of SIMD across Scotland. So you can map Lanarkshire, North and South Lanarkshire by SIMD, and you might then want to take account of where those very low SIMDs are located. But, you know, better primary care, better support in the community is probably as effective in preventing need for hospital admissions. And I know from talking, as I say, to the Director of Public Health and so on, that they are very, very aware of this. And I would have to say, from my knowledge of Scottish health boards, Lanarkshire are trying harder than most in trying to get to grips with this. So, yeah, I acknowledge their concerns. Yes, we need to do some form of, make some sort of recognition of that, but I would want to reassure both the politicians here and the people that, from what I can see, Lanarkshire Health Board are actually taking this very seriously and coming up with innovative approaches to tackling inequality.
Thank you. If I can move to Isabel, and your reflections, particularly on the issue around people in the area work at the hospital. That would be useful.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would just like to add my thanks to the elected, members in terms of the time they've taken to present these very detailed proposals, and recognise the duty of care that they do have for their constituencies. So as a starting point, I think that's important.
Thank you.
I do think there are some points that have been made in the submissions about the economic impact on the local area, on the not just the constituencies but the businesses, about things like the multiplier effect of moving from one site to the to another. I think I'd be quite keen to explore some of the impact on the low-waged employees. in terms of increased travel and what opportunities there are to work with the population, to work with the NHS for the replacement project, to look at how we can actually lessen the impact on these individuals. I think there are a number of significant points made on the impact of health concerns in terms of engaging with the local community and to make sure that there is an equality of healthcare across the whole region. I do think that any outline business case, when it gets to that point, will be very thorough in terms of assessing these issues. But at the moment, I think we would need to be looking at to see if there are a number of things that we are satisfied in terms of the scoring that actually wouldn't help the board to take the the right decision when it comes to that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll add that to our conversation about scoring criteria this afternoon. Transport is a theme, and I wondered whether you would like to offer some feedback on the transport points raised.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We certainly welcome the submission that we've just heard this morning, and it raises some interesting issues and some valid concerns on the information that has been presented to date. If we can first of all discuss maybe some information on the transport journey times to the various candidate sites. There is information presented in the latest transport reports at the moment on journey times, and for example there has been estimates with the new East Airdrie Link Road in place as well, and we can go into that further detail later on today. I'm not entirely aware of the current status of the East Airdrie Link Road. It mentions in the submission from the 28th that the road will be dual carriageway. I wasn't exactly aware that had been decided at yet, but again I'm sure that can be clarified for us today. Looking at the rail facilities, there is obviously a railway station near to the Gartcosh site. There's also one at Drumgelloch near to the Western Moffat site. That will raise some interesting debate as well. I think rail facilities could have an important part to play, potentially, depending on the catchments that they serve. I acknowledge the points that are made in this submission in terms of the catchments that are served by these stations, and that is an important area to discuss. And we must also take into account the sustainable travel opportunities in accordance with current government policy, and particularly the accessibility for those members of the public that may be in deprived areas within the hospital catchment of the existing Monklands Hospital. It's a very important aspect that we must take on board.
Thank you very much. So the decision, what is the decision on the East Airdrie Link Road that hasn't yet been
My
reached?
understanding at the moment is that we do not have an alignment for the East Airdrie Link Road as yet. I think it's still at the early stages of business case. I'm not aware if it will be single carriageway or dual carriageway. I'm not convinced that may necessarily have an impact on the decision-making process. I think the actual introduction of an East Airdrie Link Road is undoubtedly a significant benefit for both the Glen Mavis and the Western Moffat sites. I think whether the detail is it's single carriageway or dual carriageway is not particularly relevant at this point in time. The fact that there will be a road there is the most relevant point. Undoubtedly, though, if it was dual carriageway, there would be more capacity.
Yeah. So is the route of the road is decided, or?
Not that I'm aware of at the
Okay.
moment.
So we need to make sure that the project team has the latest up-to-date available information on the development of that
Absolutely.
particular road. Okay. Thank you. Excellent. Let's. There was a further. Does anybody else have any comments to make on transport for access for patients or staff, or is that covered? Okay, thank you very much. So let's turn to, if we can, I think another theme was the condition of the site. So could I ask you for comments on that, please, Andy?
Thank you, Chair. This submission raises legitimate issues in relation to the potential for land contamination and indeed the challenges in bringing land that has previous activities back into beneficial use, which is consistent with the concepts of regeneration and sustainability. And I noted that it highlighted the previous issues at the St Ambrose and Buchanan High site, and that draws to the heart of the issues and the challenges that you face, because without going too much into the history, that was a site that was subject to a lot of previous site investigation, a lot of previous work. Concerns were legitimately raised about the use of the site, which resulted in the Scottish Government doing a subsequent assessment and the local council going back through all of that previous site investigation information to demonstrate that the site was indeed suitable for use. And that is why at the sites that we're looking for the hospital, we are going through this process of completing robust site investigations consistently across all of the sites. I think between the two emails there, we do see that there's a recognition that some additional information has become available, albeit accepting that the volume of the information can have its own challenges in timescales, and indeed the process is ongoing. But it's important to go through a fair and robust site investigation, looking at the issues consistently across all of those sites to make sure that they are appropriately assessed. It does also come back to issues of the technical elements of those site investigations. What do the facts show? But there is a big unknown that is touched on, and again relates back to the previous issues, which is public perceptions. Because this is a complex area, people don't readily understand it and have an inherent mistrust of it, which is perfectly understandable because of the complexities, and it's very difficult to quantify. It's been raised in relation to the Gartcosh site, again, understandable, but it relates to other sites too. That there are issues which are not readily understandable by the majority of the population, and that need to be looked at and then presented in an understandable way.
So I count myself amongst the people who don't readily understand it. It's quite complicated. So just to assure myself from what I've read, but also in a way of explaining it for the members of the public that are watching, the sites that have been chosen and have made it this far in the process,
yes,
there are two of the three have contamination issues which have been raised or found out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So but there is nothing in the investigations which have taken place so far that would suggest that those are not recoverable or
No, these are issues
Yeah.
that can be addressed, identified and addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I think it's helpful that Neil's email says essentially that cost is then the issue.
Yes, yeah. There is a general drive to reuse sites for obvious reasons, to bring them back into beneficial use, which has a number of benefits, obviously. And as such, part of the process, the remediation industry, the site redevelopment industry, has grown to allow that to happen. So the issues that we have identified at each of the sites can be addressed. They're not the same at each of the sites, and there are different challenges there. But yes, they can be addressed either as specific works in advance or can be dealt with through the actual development itself.
So, given that the challenges at each site are very different, they're not readily comparable.
No, on a like-for-like basis, it's not as straightforward as that.
And so, cost might
Yes,
for
cost
me
is a factor.
to work out which one is the most complicated to sort out. Then cost might be.
We need to look at the approaches that can be adopted in each one.
Thank you very much. Have we? Is there any other comments on contamination?
Yeah, this is an issue of concern from a public health point of view, and when Glasgow was rethinking its hospital provision, there's discussions around areas like Rutherglen and the area around about Sheffield Stadium and so on, which is now part of the Clyde Gateway economic development area. So I've spoken to the people in Clyde Gateway about the decontamination that's been done there, and it seems to be very thorough, very effective, not cheap, but it has worked. So I'm happy that this is possible. The concern will always be that if you look at hospitals like the Queen Elizabeth and the Children's Hospital in Edinburgh that are having problems with infection and so on, from what I understand, that's nothing to do with the ground conditions. It's to do more with building issues. So I think people should be reassured that the contamination bit of this can be overcome. The one question I would have is mine works. Clearly this is a big mining area, and I think I would want some reassurance that if mine works are discovered in any of these areas, that can be remediated appropriately.
Yeah, so if I can just pick that up, again, I suppose to a certain extent that's a more readily understandable issue, because the mine workings basically result in a hole in the ground or a depression in the ground, so and most people can understand that. So yes, it is a significant issue. It is one that we're looking at. Again, it can be dealt with, and it's a function of cost depending on the nature and extent of the mine workings.
But do we know where they are, or do we have an effective way of discovering if they are underneath a bit of ground?
Yes, and that is part of the current investigation.
So I think just to check down, I think the only other issue, if nobody else has any reflections, is the question of footfall at Gart Kosh versus those at the other sites, and how that might affect staffing requirements, funding, and those kind of things. And I expect, Sir Harry, we're looking to you to explore that one as well. So the submission raises the question of, if the hospital is at the Gart Kosh site, then it will have a greater catchment area, which I think is recognised in the papers. The submission asks questions about how that would affect A&E and various other bits.
Well, again, this was an issue that was raised by people in the southwest of Glasgow about the closure of the Victoria Infirmary. If you build a big enough facility, it will cope with footfall. The concern they had in South Glasgow was travel distance and so on, but what happened was the bus services set up to make the Queen Elizabeth Hospital a destination. Buses go out, Glasgowers will take that in to account. So I'm not quite clear what the issue is. The geography of Lanarkshire is not something I'm expert in at all.
If I can just reprise the
Sure.
the point that's made. So it's point 5 on page 3 of our document, which says, we remain concerned about the impact of moving Monklands Hospital to the fringes of the NHS Lanarkshire, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde boundary will have on footfall at the new hospital. We believe NHS Lanarkshire have grossly underestimated the change in flow, particularly at the A&E unit, with more people from Glasgow finding it more convenient than the central Glasgow hospitals. We believe Gartcosh as a site could and should have been ruled out of site consideration for this reason.
I don't know the basis for suggesting that. The evidence I'm led to believe is that people from Cumbernauld and so on tend to go into Glasgow for emergency care rather than going to Monklands. So people will tend to flow along motorway lines and all that kind of thing. This is something that I think needs a bit more analysis, and that analysis needs to be made public, but it's impossible to predict. You know, I would be surprised if people who currently use the Royal Infirmary or the Victoria Emergency GP unit in South West Glasgow and so on, I'd be surprised if they would move out of Glasgow, but who knows, it's difficult to predict.
Thank you very much. We're supported today by various members of the project team, and I just wanted to ask if there were any reflections from the audience. Graham? Yeah, would you like to?
Thank you.
And please introduce yourself.
Graham Johnston, Head of Planning and Development, NHS Lanarkshire. Can I come back and provide some additional information on two of the points that were raised there?
Thank you.
Firstly, I'll just provide a clarification in terms of the East Airdrie Link Road. Just for information, the local authority have confirmed that the section that's referred to as the East Airdrie Link Road, which would be the part that would be connected to the sites at either Glen Mavis or Western Moffat, would be a single carriageway. That's a factual piece of information. In terms of cross-boundary flow patient activity, we have undertaken an assessment. We published this in early January, 10th of January, when we provided the update on the 3 shortlisted sites. So we did an analysis for a number of sites, and a primary part of that assessment was to determine the impact at a number of sites and to determine whether they should be considered further. Only one site was considered further at that point, which was Western Moffat. The key point of information, I think, is the concern that if the hospital is located at Gartcosh, there would be an influx or an unintended consequence. We've undertaken an analysis, we've undertaken that in a very systematic and logical fashion, and it's based upon travel distance and travel time. The impact at Gartcosh is that there would be a net increase in emergency department attendances by around 8,000 per annum. That would translate into approximately 22 additional beds. At Glen Mavis, the impact would be just under 2,500 ED attendances, which translates into 6 beds. And at Western Moffat, the impact is actually negligible. So we have undertaken an analysis. We've published that, it's out there in the public domain, and there is a difference at the 3 sites, and we've quantified that.
And just to clarify another bit, it's unfortunate that neither Neil or Alex could be with us today because of parliamentary commitments. In terms of, it would be good to be able to discuss the points with them. In terms of funding, which is a point that is raised here, how does patient flow, so if more patients come to A&E at one of the sites, how does that affect funding? Are you dealing with more patients for the same money, or?
In reality, it's a very simple economic situation in that the cash follows the patients. So we deal with the patients as they turn up. We then have a service level agreement with our partner health boards, and we engage with them to identify the impact and the costs.
Can I just clarify, these 8,000 patients more at Gartcosh, that's Lanarkshire retaining Lanarkshire patients?
50% is retained patients from Cumbernauld and Forsyth, 50% is patients flowing in from Glasgow.
So you've quantified that, right? Sorry, I thought you were just keeping Lanarkshire
No,
patients.
so there's a significantly detailed piece of work done there. We've published a summary of that, and it's been undertaken down to postcode sector level, so it's quite sophisticated if you want to use that term.
Thank you very much. Is there anything?
Chair,
else?
may I ask a
Of course.
question of Graham? There's been, this submission raises questions about process, right?
Yeah.
And in particular about the lack of local community at the scoring events. Now, can you talk us through how you've responded to that?
Right, so our objective has been to assure and ensure that the scoring event is equitable. In order to assure that, or ensure that, we have 100 people coming to the scoring event. 51 of those people will be members of the public. The 51 members of the publics are calculated on the basis of existing activity at the hospital. So we have endeavoured to reflect the current position so that people who use the hospital more are reflected more, are represented more. And at the risk of taking more time than I need to, that 51 people translates into 12 people from ML6 Airdrie, 11 people from ML5 Coatbridge, 11 people from Cumbernauld, Forsyth and Northern Corridor, 3 people from ML4 Bells Hill, 3 people from G71 Tannerside Uddingston, a further 7 people from the University Hospital of Wishaw catchment area because they use the hospital to a fairly significant extent, and the final 4 people from University Hospital Hermires catchment. So there's a very broad spread across the whole of the county, not just the Monklands catchment area, and that's because the people who use the hospital come from across the county.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Graham? I have one, if I may. So the point raised in the submission is that people who will be most affected are unlikely to put themselves forward and take part in these kind of exercises, and we know that. The submission helpfully suggests that those who have put themselves forward and who are at the scoring event should be given specific information about the makeup of the people in the area and those who live in the areas that rank highest on the multiple deprivation scale. So is that part of the plan for the scoring event to provide that information?
There's 2 separate points in there, I think. The first one is to make sure that that body of people are represented, and the endeavour has been to make sure that the largest users of the hospital are the largest people participative in the scoring. The second point is that all the information that the scorers will have will be given to them in advance. 99% of that is already out there, if not 100%. We will conduct on the day of scoring a summary of that information so that people can have a refresh.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. I think that concludes our... Oh,
Chair, could I just...
Of
There
course.
was one point I wanted... the submission rightly points out there'd been
thank you, Graham.
Thank you.
a downward revision of one of the estimates, and I just wanted to point out that the site investigation is, particularly on this scale, is an iterative process, and actually part of our remit is when new information comes in, we have to look at it and reconsider, and that's exactly what happened in that particular instance. We are in the process of completing supplementary site investigations, even up until last week. That gave us additional technical information on that one particular issue, which caused us to revise the figures down in the way that's highlighted in the submission.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any other points to raise on this particular submission? Isabel? Andy?
No.
David? And Harry? No? So thank you very much for that deliberation. We will move on to considering the next one, the next submission shortly. We'll take a short break before that, and we will check the questions if any have come in from the public. So thank you very much. If you join us again in a few minutes' time, we'll come back. Actually, we will start again at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much.